Aloha, and welcome to SUP FM, the podcast for stand-up paddleboarders everywhere. So with no further ado, let's get out on the water and on with the show. Here are your hosts, Nick and Simon.
Good morning, Simon. How are you doing over there in... What do you call the place where you live? I mean, it's the south of England, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the New Forest, so just on the Hampshire-Dorset border, and some lagoons and harbours and the sea and some great rivers to paddle on. So very, very lucky to live where I am. But today we're covering comprehensively a different area of the UK and one that's very popular with paddles at the moment.
Yeah, London, home to about 9 million people, has traditionally enjoyed a large paddling fraternity with the Thames running straight through, with the APP World Tour coming through as well. And Paul Hyman has had a company for almost 11 years, so since 2010. It's called Active 360, and he's been teaching people how to paddle, taking them on incredible events. So he does so much. He really does a wide variety of things. It's not just learning or teaching people to paddle. As I said, he does events. He helps the London Marathon. He's in Thames SUP Relay, Source to Sea, all kinds of things which we'll cover in great detail in this podcast. But he also does quite a few SUP retreats around Europe. One down in Sardinia. He takes people over to Slovenia. He's done a lot of work in India as well with stand-up paddle. So he really is an interesting guy to chat to. And one thing that we didn't discuss was a good mate of his called Bill... What's his name, Simon?
It's Bill Bailey. He's probably the most prominent British personality. Bill Bailey's an English comedian, and you can check out his stuff on YouTube. He's a phenomenally talented musician, but he's really taken to SUP in a massive way. So much so that he's actually created his own board, which is looks a bit like something that James Bond would use. It's an incredible sort of stealth type board, but there's
and
it's
lots called of the Billboard. I love it.
Exactly. And it does look proper stealthy stuff. So you've got to be careful with these very dark boards, leaving them out in the sun too much because you don't want them to explode. But I'm sure that's not an issue with this one. But it's great having a prominent British celebrity getting behind SUP. And Paul, as you say, is hugely prominent in London. He's got a number of sites that Active 360 operate from. And I know he's got a really experienced bunch of coaches that work from him. So, really interested to hear this interview.
Yeah, let's hear it for Paul Hyman. Mr. Paul Hyman, thank you so much for coming on to SUP FM podcasts.
Thank you, and good to speak to you, Nick.
Yeah, how are you doing? And obviously, we're recording this at the end of, when is it? March?
April.
Good Lord.
You lost a month.
And yeah, lost a month. I lost a lot during the lockdown. So we're all locked down, and you're getting beer delivered to you and everything like that. It's how's life where you are?
Yeah, it's good. I live on a boat on the Thames. It's a big old Dutch barge. So and I'm on an island, so it's good. But it's a bit frustrating seeing the river every day and being on the river and not using it. But we decided at the start of lockdown, even though there's sort of slightly ambiguous rules, if you live on water, it's perfectly safe to go out and use it. We decided to show solidarity with everyone else and not go out. So yeah, that's it. And we stopped operating.
Yeah, I've done the same thing as well.
We stopped operating as soon as the lockdown started. So we're looking forward to getting out there and running sessions for people, and I'm sure people are raring to go. We're getting emails all the time and calls saying, well, when are we going to start again, and can we hire a board or can we hire a canoe? So I think there's a lot of pent-up demand out there.
Yeah, well, I hope it resolves sooner rather than later. It's looking like it's going to happen for us, hopefully in the next week or so in Portugal. But has London always been your home?
No, I was born and grew up in Bristol, a seafaring town, and then I moved to Portsmouth. I was a student in Portsmouth, and really got into ocean stuff there, so sea kayaking and a bit of sailing and anything that got me on water, really. And then I moved to London, and I moved to London and then had a spell in on the coast again, back in Bournemouth. I got into scuba diving and then back to London, and then eventually back into kayaking. So I did that for years.
I had a look online, and it appears that you were a teacher down at Portsmouth and then did a master's degree in sports science in the late 90s. What prompted that change? Is that correct? And then what prompted that change?
I did a sport and a sports masters in the 90s, because I was just interested in finding out more about what I was already doing, because I got into sports management and I was running sports development programs and sports centres and all sorts of stuff. So I decided to take a step back and learn a bit more about what I was doing, and did an interesting dissertation and then carried on in that for a bit, and then set up my own sports project management business, H2O Sports. And then in 2011 I set up Active 360 and started paddleboarding. Okay. I'd never been on a paddleboard until that point in time. I went to the boat show, met a few guys, met the Starboard guys, and met Alex from Nash, Alex Tobup, and decided to start up paddleboarding. By the time I left the show, I was on track and placed an order.
But had you ever been on a board?
I went on a board in the boat show, in the pool.
Yeah, so that was the very, very first time you stepped on a stand-up paddleboard?
It was. I had a chance a few weeks before that, because I was doing an update on my canoe coaching course with British Canoeing. I was doing the new level 3 coaching course, and one of the guys there had a paddleboard, and he was coaching canoeing and kayaking from a board. So I just immediately saw, this makes sense. This is so flexible, and I could do all of this stuff, and I just knew I would take to it. So I didn't really wait around and spend time trying it out. Just jumped on a board in the show. Thought, yeah, this is good. I could just see the potential for it, and I think if you're into paddle sports generally in a big way, then you always take to stand-up paddleboarding. It's just an extension. Any whitewater kayaker I've taught will just pick this up in no time. It's just, they have the balance. They're not afraid of falling in water, so they learn very quickly. Sometimes flat water recreational paddlers don't necessarily pick it up so quickly, but all of my friends who are coaches or whitewater paddlers or surf kayakers, they just take to it within 20 minutes. You've got them standing up doing all sorts of stuff. So.
And how did it feel when the first time you managed to get a stand-up paddleboard out into the wild?
Yeah, really good. I mean, I did some stuff in London. We got a delivery of boards. We started doing stuff on the canals and on the Thames, and then. I live on the tidal Thames. I've lived on the river for 20 odd years, so that was always my first love, to get on the tideway, as we call it, and see how we could develop from canoeing. By that time I'd set up 3 different canoe clubs over a 10-year period, and I wanted to see how we could develop this and make it really a really successful water sport in London, a big part of the London water sport scene, which I think it's become now. There's a lot. You always see paddleboarders out there with kayakers and rowers. It's sort of got its place in London now. So yeah, and then it was just a matter of taking it to other places. I mean, I got an opportunity early on to go down with the Starboard guys and do some stuff in Devon, and we did stuff in Dorset with Nash. And on the sea, so we started to get that bit of all-round experience. Then in 3 years,
sure. And just before we jump into the story of Active 360, what do you enjoy most of it, the different disciplines of SUP? If it's touring or whitewater SUP, or purely for fitness, or racing, or surfing, or downwinding, or foiling, or even yoga?
So, mostly what we do here is recreational and sort of introducing people to the sport, and a sort of quite low level, really, getting them into it, developing skills. Personally, I enjoy expeditions, doing long treks, just covering distance and taking in the scenery. So, taking everything with me, that sort of thing. We did the Greenland expedition in 2013, and we've done lots of other stuff since that, different distances, wildish conditions, and just enjoying it. So that's...
Is it just you and me that enjoy that, or is it probably one of the most popular forms of paddling these days?
I think it's the biggest growth area, because that it's really suited to that. You could see, if you have the right paddleboard, it's a bit like a sea kayak, very flexible. You can take it off and just do interesting stuff, see interesting places from aboard. And I think the fact that you're standing up, you see more. A bit less flexible in what you can carry on a board, but you can be innovative and carry stuff, in dry bags. And the good thing is you can fly with an inflatable board. You can go anywhere in the world. You haven't got the same problems you've got taking a sea kayak around, having to drive it everywhere. So yeah, it's a really flexible thing, and I think that's always going to be the growth area. We've done some whitewater kayaking, whitewater paddleboarding recently, and enjoyed that. And we've just invested in 10 whitewater boards, so that's something I want to develop over the next year or two. But I'm never...
Yeah, we just interviewed some guys who paddled down the Zambezi.
Nice, yeah.
Which was quite a demand. I mean, they didn't just paddle down. I think they did it in 2016, but amazing adventure, it really is.
Yeah, incredible. Well, I think the whole whitewater thing has got a long way to go, both in running rivers and playing around on waves and just enjoying moving water. We refer to it as rough water SUP rather than whitewater, because a lot of the weirs here, the water off the weirs is a sort of very it's fast moving and strong currents. But it's not necessarily got, you have waves, but it's not got the same kick as whitewater. But it's really fun and challenging.
Mm-hmm. Great. So can we dive into Active 360, the company that you set up in 2011, almost 10 years ago? How was that idea formed? Was it late one night in a bar, feverishly jotting down notes on the back of a paper serviette, or was it in some other way?
Well, I set up, the company is actually called Think 360 Sports. I set it up with a friend, Sambit Mahapatra, who's a businessman, entrepreneur, who I'm still a really good friend with. And we decided to, initially the company would work on various sports projects, including a lot of IT type stuff, which he's really into. He's a techie and runs a company called Siona Tech, which does like virtual reality learning programs. So the idea was that it would be much more varied, and Active 360 would be the activity arm, which would develop various sports, minority sports that we thought had legs to grow, and we would take a sport and develop it and see where we could go with it. But I just got into the paddleboarding first, decided that I'd just focus on that, so it just went that way. And Sambit decided that he would focus on his tech stuff and lead me to it, and so I brought in other friends to help me grow it, and that's where it went. It wasn't really it wasn't originally meant to be that, but I think I just felt that this sport had such potential in London, particularly in London, but around the world. And 2011 it was still quite small everywhere, really, apart from some of the European countries and Australia, perhaps. The States.
And naturally, the more people are exposed to the outdoor environment, the more they'll take care of it. So what was your main mission in those early days, apart from just growing the sport? Did it have an environmental awareness angle to it?
Less so. I mean, I've always been an environmentalist, always been really interested in the environment since I was a teenager, really, and did various environmental projects, energy conservation projects, to to reduce CO2 in buildings, and I did some work to create safer routes so that people could walk or cycle instead of drive, and lots of different things through other work I was doing over the years. So it sort of was natural to grow into that, but really what got me started was we started doing some cleanups of, first of all, the canals before we even did the Thames, clearing up plastic, and we realised what a state those waterways were getting in with people throwing plastic into them. So the cleanups grew, and then we did a mass cleanup, and then the whole thing grew bigger. And now really the growth area is corporate groups, companies contacting us, wanting to take a group of their staff out, clean up a stretch of river, learn about plastic pollution, develop their own awareness, get some brownie points for clearing up.
Did you do a cleanup with
Burberry? Yeah, Burberry have done, I think, about 5 or 6 cleanups with us. They're really changing their image because they had some really bad press a few years ago for burning fashion that was unfashionable, the stuff that it time limited, I guess. And so they changed. They've done a lot to change their image, and doing the cleanups was part of that work, but also not only about their image, but also getting the message across to staff, because they're a big company, so they had a lot of staff that they wanted to talk to about the environment and where they're going.
Excellent. Well, it's great that they're getting a chance to do better things.
Yeah, a lot of companies are getting into that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Absolutely. I suppose it's an important part of being a global citizen. But how did your services develop over the years? I mean, you now operate from 4 different locations around London, is that right?
So we have Paddington, Kew Bridge and Brentford. So those are our 3 bases. And then we with 2 of our coaches, we set up another company, 360 Richmond. So we have this 4th base, but it's a separate company running it, 360 Richmond. And that was really successful last year, right by Richmond Bridge, which is a great location.
And there's quite an interesting thing, I know, because paddling on the Thames, you're not allowed to just paddle on the Thames, are you? And have you developed this thing called the Thames Skills Knowledge? Yeah,
so paddling on the Thames, initially it wasn't restricted in London. And when we started up, the restrictions were just starting to bite, because before 211, I think before 210 even, people were just going down, groups were going down into central London through the city with no buoyancy aids, ankle leashes, which is really dangerous with the currents in the river, and all sorts of practices that are not really safe for the river, suited to open sea, but not really right for a tidal river with strong currents. So the PLA started to see all that, started to restrict the sport, and eventually they put restrictions on that stop you going below Putney. And at that point we challenged it, got an MP involved, said, look, this isn't fair to just jump on this sport because it's a new sport. Kayaking's allowed right through London. So the deal we struck was with the chief harbour master at the time was, if we develop training for people so that they can go out and do it safely and confidently, then you'll let people go back through London. So that's where the Thames Skills and Knowledge came in. So if you go below Putney Bridge, you have to have done level 1, and if you go down below Chelsea Bridge, you have to have level 2.
And are you the only guys who offer that course?
We are, and the PLA. I mean, when we set it up, the harbour master then said, "Look, I'm aware you've got a bit of a monopoly on this now, but anyone else can come in and set the training up as well, and we'll work with anyone as long as they jump through the same hoops and show us that they can do it." So it's not exclusive.
Are you thinking about taking that course online?
Yes, that's what we've been developing during the lockdown. So we're working on the Zoom platform initially, and we've rewritten the whole course, extended the time because it was a 4-hour course, 2 hours on water, 2 hours off for the level 1. So we've extended it now to over 6 hours, and it's now a modular course. So the theory modules can all be done in 45-minute bites and done through online platform, and then the practical will still be done on the river. So they'll still get to go out and we'll do stuff on the river, but more of it can be done without actually travelling to a base and sitting in a classroom. I think people aren't going to want to sit in classrooms over the next year, particularly because it means sitting close to people, and I think that's always going to have some risk. But I think long term this could be really good, because why travel a long way just to sit and do a theory part of a course, when you don't need to.
Exactly.
So it could save
so
travel. Yeah, and it means we can spread it out over a period of time. People can do it over several weeks. They don't have to give up half a day or a day to come and do a course. They can do it in bites, and I think that'll suit some people. We still may run the classroom courses eventually. We may go back to offering that as well, but at the moment we're thinking the online could be a way to go.
And there's no practical component at all?
There is. There'll still be an element on water, but that'll happen after they've done all the theory. And we'll make as much available online as possible, so that they can go out on the water, do a trip, see the stuff that they've been learning online in situ, so they can understand it and feel it and be part of the river.
Great. So there are some good things that come out of this horrendous virus.
I hope so.
Yeah. So there's a multitude of amazing projects that you've started or been a part of. Did it start with the Fortitude London Sup Marathon back in 2012, I think, or maybe even before that?
That was the first big event we did, I think. I mean, we'd done some events before that, but that was the first big one, and we were asked to help Fortitude. They were called Momentum before that, and then, so that when they approached us, and they wanted to raise money for this cancer charity, colon cancer, which was something I was really interested in, because my grandmother had died of it, and so I got the opportunity to work with them. We set up the marathon and ran, I think, 6 marathons in the end, and the last one raised over 100,000. I think it was £110,000 for this charity. So
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, the last one was not last year, the year before, and it was in honour of a paddler a fundraiser, who then went on to his cancer returned and he died, but he was very brave and did lots of fundraising even in his last weeks and months.
Sure. So are they not doing it again? Because 26 miles or 42 kilometers is a long way.
Yeah, I think they're now, because they ran the same event for a number of years, they're having a step back. They do other fundraising events like long cycle rides, and they're having a rethink on the on-water thing, because the last one was just like such a big event. It was hard to beat it, I think. So I think they'll be back with something, but they're just taking a break from it this year. And I think, we've got a number of fundraisers that are now sort of ready to go ahead. We've got Waves for Change, which would be in July, but we're not sure whether the restrictions will have eased in time. So we're hoping to run it, and that'll be another long distance paddle raising funds for a charity in South Africa, Townships Charity for young people. And there are other ones in the pipeline that have made bookings provisionally, but we're not sure whether we'll be able to do them this year. It's, everything's in flux at the moment, so hopefully we'll run some.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say you've had, you mentioned South Africa, and you've also travelled to India and been involved with various projects out there, including building wooden paddleboards and things. How did that come about, and was that also a fund? We did
that was we were asked to go out and help with the India Surf Festival, and did that for a few years. That was in Odisha, formerly called Orissa, which is on the east coast of India, in the Bay of Bengal. and we did some expeditions around Chilica Lagoon, which is the second biggest lagoon in the world, and generally had a lot of fun. And I went out again last year. Last year I went to the south of India and looked at there's an event there that they wanted me to get involved in, which again is a big surf and sup festival down in the far south. So yeah, I've sort of got a bit of connection with India. We met. Hopefully, we'll go back there one day once everything gets back a bit more to normal.
Yeah, I think. But it seems like you've got a lot of international connections. You don't just do things in London. And the tall ship Lady Avonor sailing around the Hebrides is another event that you do. Is that a yearly thing?
That is, we've run that 4 times now. We won't be doing it this year, because there are a whole load of question marks in the short term about people being on a ship together, a small space relatively. But I think it'll bounce back. We hope it'll bounce back next year. But that's just one of the best trips I've ever done, because you get to go on this tall ship, which is built by a good friend, Stefan Fritz, who converted a tug that he found in Amsterdam into a tall ship. So she's an amazing ship. You'd never believe she wasn't built as a tall ship. But, and we go around to different islands and paddle on islands and paddle in locks and see interesting places. Fingal's Cave we've done a few times.
Nice. And did anything crazy happen on one of those trips at all?
Well, the wildlife is probably the craziest thing. Like having a pod of dolphins following the boat along and going under the ship and alongside and just following us under full sail, which was quite an incredible experience. But I'm not.
Is it very quiet when it's under full sail?
It is a sort of quiet. I mean, there's a whistling sound as she goes along. You know, the wind in the sails, because she's got a big sail area. Really, really fascinating ship to sail. She'll go over a long way before she capsizes, because she's got so much weight in the bottom, being formerly a tug. You know, with all this a big lot of ship below the waterline. So really interesting ship, and probably would self-right, although no one's tried to do that. No one's taken her over yet.
Well, I hope no one's ever tried to capsize it.
No, not yet.
But for those people who don't know, where are the Hebrides?
Hebrides are the Western Isles north of mainland Scotland. So we sail from Oban on the west coast, and then we head out from there, and different groups of islands. So you have the inner Hebrides and the outer Hebrides. We've tended to stay around the inner Hebrides so that we have more paddling time. If you sail out to the outer Hebrides, you spend a lot more time sailing. But a lot of it's all made up when we get there. We have rough ideas what we want to do, but then we have to wait and see what the wind is doing, and you know what the direction and the strength of wind. So it's one of those trips you can never set out an exact itinerary. You just have a rough idea what you're going to do. But every trip has been great, and they've never disappointed.
That must be the beauty of it, moving around all the time. But Oban is obviously not just a town, it's a whiskey as well. So does whiskey play a large part of that trip?
We have been known to call into distilleries and pick up some samples, some bottles. Yeah, and that becomes part of the trip.
Because it would be silly not to, really.
It would be rude not to.
Sardinia is another amazing location you venture off to occasionally. What are some of your best experiences out there?
Sardinia has really been interesting. We got to know some people on that live on the small island off Sardinia, San Pietro, and they run a sup school, Sup Adventures. So we started to work with them closely and take groups out there, and it's a lovely little island. The beauty of a small island rather than the main Sardinian island is that you you always have shelter from the wind, because you have some sort of big high areas on the island that give you shelter. So if the wind's blowing from the west, you just paddle on the east and so on. So we tend to move around the island depending on where the wind direction is. But the Mediterranean in the spring and autumn when we go can be quite rough, but you can always find shelter on San Pietro. So there's always paddling. We never really miss a day. Sometimes you get surf, and we get to do the sea caves and cliffs and all sorts of interesting places on the coast. And the food's incredible. Sardinian food is just like an extension of Italian food.
Fantastic. Sounds like an amazing holiday. You mentioned sea caves. Is it quite an amazing, spectacular coastline, being mountainous?
It is, yeah. There's sea caves to the north of San Pietro that are always really interesting to go in. It's very rocky on the north with big cliffs, the north and the west of the island, and then the south of the island is more sandy beaches. So it's interesting. A small island, you could paddle around it in about a day and a half. It's not a big area, but that's nice because everything's easy to get to, and there's enough coastline to make it interesting. You're not doing the same stuff every day.
Sounds like the perfect location. I think I should chuck that on my bucket list. Always wanted to go to Sardinia.
Definitely.
Well, sticking with the S's, Slovenia has also been a place that you guys head off to.
Yes, Marco and Samo invited us over a few years ago, and I've been encouraging people to go there. They do some amazing trips around the area, the Socha River, which I'd only ever seen as a whitewater river. The upper Socha is a famous whitewater destination for kayakers. And what I didn't realise was you had this beautiful lower Socha, which is slow running through gorges, really beautiful. So they showed me that, and Lake Bled and other lakes, and the Ljubljana River. So yeah, really lovely place. Again, fantastic food, good climate, lovely people. Yeah, definitely worth a visit.
Sounds great. So coming back to home, did you organise the River Thames Source to Sea stand-up paddleboard relay event through Central London in 2016?
Yeah, a few years ago, we were involved in a thing called the Thames Relay for some years before that, and we were invited to be part of it, to have a sub-part of a longer relay, which had people relaying a bottle of water from the source of the Thames down to the sea. And so we played a part in that for a few years, and then the funders, the organisers, decided to scrap the event. So we said, well, why don't we just take it over and run a Source to Sea SUP event? And we did that, and it was great fun. So we divided the Thames up into legs and had different people paddling different legs, but all on paddleboards. Some of them were big groups, maybe 10 people doing a leg, and some of them were 2 people doing a leg, and people travelled from a long way. I think the furthest was from Africa. Someone came over to take part.
So it sounds like events play a large part in the business of Active 360, but is the core business teaching people how to paddle on London's waterways?
Yeah, that's the bread and butter, just taking people out to give them lessons and their first SUP experience, or improving their skills, that sort of stuff. That's our day-to-day stuff. But the events are just always really interesting, I guess, tiring, and quite often halfway through them, or in the run-up to the event, certainly I'm thinking, why did I get myself into this? But then when the event happens and it's worked, it's a great feeling very satisfying feeling that you've run an event and it's raised a load of money. Or one of the last big ones we ran was a mass river clean-up with 250 people clearing up plastic from Kew to Richmond, for example. And that's called Get On Board, and that'll bounce back. Probably not this year, but maybe next year. They're going to try and make it bigger and better. So yeah, that was an interesting one. But they're always different types of events, different angles. But they're all interesting.
I can totally relate to what you're saying. Is when in the lead up to the event, it's like I really don't wish I could carry on with this, and then after the event, you think, oh wow, that was fantastic. Let's do another one next year.
I always have this sinking feeling that something's going to go wrong, and this will be the event that everyone will remember us for, because it'll be a disaster, and the weather will be awful, and we'll be stretched to the limits, and then you get to the day, and it all just falls into place like clockwork, and you think, yeah, it was okay, we planned it.
Well, that actually happened to me because we did 3 years of the Guadiana Challenge down in the southeastern border of Portugal and Spain.
Lovely.
And it was fantastic, and it was growing and growing and growing. Every year we're getting more. And eventually we had, I don't know, something like 300 people paddling. And the year after that, there was this horrible hurricane, crazy storm predicted for the exact day, and we had to cancel. So that's when I dropped it and said, okay, that's it.
You've had enough.
Game over.
You're gonna have to invite me over. I'm really keen. I've never been to Portugal. Been to Spain numerous times.
I can't believe it.
No, I know. I've been invited a few times. Never quite made it, but it's on very close to the top of my list.
Well, standing invitation. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Just a quick few questions about the SUP industry in the UK. How many people would you say are enjoying stand-up paddle in the UK and worldwide these days?
Wow, that's a really hard one. We don't have any exact figures. I've talked to Starboard about it a few years ago because I was trying to find out, and there's certainly tens of thousands of people in the UK have boards. Whether they're regular paddle boarders is interesting. The race scene is actually very small. I think probably under 1,000 people taking part. But it's really hard to gauge it because a lot of people are just doing it like kayaking. They go out there and just paddle. With kayaking, you have British canoeing and kayaking, sorry, but you have British canoeing covering it. And I have been the NGB for years, so you've got some idea. You've got an idea of the number of people in clubs and the number of people coaching and doing it, affiliated. But even with those sports, there are still loads of people that just have a canoe in the back garden and they take it out once or twice a year. So it's really hard to gauge numbers, but I'm certain it's growing. We're seeing more and more people every year out on water. The Thames now, a lot of individuals are starting to go out. We see them just randomly out there, which is great. Sometimes I worry a little bit that they don't really look like they know what they're doing, which is a bit worrying on the Thames because it's the tidal Thames is quite a tricky body of water, but the number of incidents is low, so at least they seem to be looking after themselves. So yeah, very hard to gauge numbers, but we know it's growing.
It is tough, yeah. And I was speaking to the CEO of the APP World Tour, and I mentioned to him that there were probably anywhere between 17 and 35 million surfers around the world. And he seemed to believe that there were probably a similar amount of stand-up paddlers in the world. I'm not sure if it's actually reached that. Would you agree with that?
I would have thought it's overtaken surfing now in terms of numbers because SUP has so many disciplines. You've got the race scene, which I said is quite small, but you've got people doing expeditions, you've got people just going to beaches and playing around on boards, and SUP holidays, SUP yoga. There's just so many different branches. Whitewater SUP. So if you take all that into account, I think it's a lot bigger. I'd be surprised. I mean, surfing's is amazing, but it's very limited by the number of breaks you have, the number of suitable waves, and surfboards are hard boards, so carrying them around, it involves having a car or living close to water. SUP is more flexible and it covers so many different things now. I think if it hasn't outgrown surfing, I think it will quite soon.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's very, very logical progression. So many people talk about a slowdown in the uptake of the sport from the radical growth it experienced from 2010 to 2015. I think this is mainly the suppliers of stand-up paddleboards. Do you feel that the sport is still growing healthily?
I think so. There's always the worry that it'll go the way of, say, windsurfing, where you had this, massive rise in the sport and then it plateaued and declined. But I think I think if people are careful with the sport and don't spoil it by flooding it with really cheap, bad equipment, which is a bit of a worry at the moment. There's a lot of stuff being sold in supermarkets that's quite poor quality. I think if that sort of fades away a bit and people support people making good equipment a bit more and willing to buy better equipment, at least for their second purchase, then I think the sport could just keep growing. It's so flexible, and so there's so many aspects of it that you can do. It's very much like canoeing or kayaking, but you have this. The big advantage is you can make an inflatable paddleboard that performs very well, and quite often better than some of the hard boards. Although the best hard boards are always going to be better than the best inflatables. The quality of the good inflatables being made now is very high, and I think the technical innovation will keep people in the sport, keep people interested, and the flexibility of being able to carry a board around in a backpack, and they're getting lighter, so it's even easier to carry them. So they're performing well, but they're easy to carry on your back, and they pack up smaller.
Yeah, I think Red's making a half-size one now, isn't it? Or it just doubles up into half-size.
Yeah, there's so much flexibility in paddleboards, so I think that will keep things going a lot longer. And if you compare with windsurfing, like any surfing, requires certain conditions. Paddleboarding sort of works in most conditions. You know, if it's really windy, you can get a sail, one of these subsails, and play around with that and do a downwind paddle. If it's flat and no wind, then that's brilliant. So it's just so flexible. You've got so many aspects to it. So I think that's what will keep it going.
And it's a lot cheaper than windsurfing as well, because all that kit, I mean, I remember I used to windsurf back in South Africa, and it's expensive, and you break it all the time. So it's really a lot of expensive kit.
Yeah, whereas you can buy if you can't afford a really good new paddleboard, you can buy a good second-hand one for £400 or £500. So, you know, something that's really good, and you can get a good second.
Or a cheap Chinese board if you want.
Yeah. I mean, the Chinese boards, the stuff that's coming direct from the factories, is actually getting better. They're learning how to make stuff and market it, but I think you've got to be a bit careful. There's some rubbish coming out. Cheap doesn't always mean bad, but it can do. So I'd be a bit wary of some of that stuff. We had our fingers burned years ago when we bought some cheap stuff and tried it out, and regretted it. Realised that it was just not what we want. So we tend to stick with the bigger established names now, but we're always willing to give new brands a try. You know, if people come up and want to show us their brand, we're always happy to give it a try and give them some feedback. And if it's good enough, we'll get interested in helping them sell it.
So let's go into more expensive boards, the race scene. How did the APP World Tour affect business for you in London? Did it create any more exposure, or not really?
Not a great deal. I mean, if I felt, if people watched it, there were a small number of spectators, but it didn't really get big local coverage. So I think things like the SUP Marathon probably worked better for us, and the mass paddle event that I mentioned in Richmond probably worked better in terms of getting participation going. It was a great event to watch. I was really fortunate to be able to go and watch it on a launch, and really enjoyed it, and it was fascinating watching all these top racers come through London. But whether it expanded the sport locally, I think difficult one. Not sure. Maybe globally there was some impact, and I think the ambition for that event is great, and good luck to them if they can develop it into something big.
Yeah, I hope they go well, because I think they had some problems a couple of years back, and it's a noble thing to try and create a world tour, and it's an expensive thing as well. And obviously with COVID-19, I think that could be hazardous for them to try and carry on, because sponsors might dry up. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tricky year for lots of things, but the smoke will clear, and maybe in a year's time things will look different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope it clears sooner rather than later for you, and good luck with SUP in London. It's lovely to see somebody doing such an amazing job in one of the world's capitals. So thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, and I hope to see you in Portugal soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you for listening to SUP FM, the #1 podcast for stand-up paddlers wherever you are. If you like what you've heard, please leave us a review on iTunes. Until then, we'll see you on the water.